Hey guys, first of all, thank you for supporting me on Patreon. This video is a bonus video. It has additional clips from the conversation I had with Sam McAllister. You can watch the original video on YouTube and then watch the bonus clips right here. So let's get started.
Some of us like to work on really large projects, really large commercial buildings. Others just want to stay in residential because it can be sometimes a little bit more fun, a lot more personal, and you get to see the full scope of the project from design to completion. Whereas when you're working for a large practice, sometimes buildings take 10 years to be designed, approved, constructed, and then practically handed over. You may only see a very small part of that project. And it could be the front end or a package end. So
Yeah, like with houses, I think you're doing the whole thing. When you're doing houses, when you're doing smaller projects, you would be designing, you'd be supervising if you're doing it on your own. Whereas on bigger projects, you would have a team and you would be a part of a big team, but that project would not have your whole and it might not give you that creative satisfaction that a smaller project might be able to give you.
yes, and when you're working on the larger projects, sometimes in some companies there may be certain teams who just focus on certain parts of that project. Some firms I've worked for, or some sectors of those firms, will have one team just trying to win work. They'll be doing designs and competitions or bidding for work. Others will be maybe taking it to get the planning approval, or we call it DA here in this region. Others will just be on packages for construction documentation. And I've seen some incredibly talented people who just know how buildings go together. So once it gets the planning approval, they will go and set up the packages, they'll do the set out, they'll make sure that everything is absolutely perfect and worked out. So when it goes to the contractor, there's going to be very little mistakes. And sometimes that works really well for a firm because not everybody has the skills to design or conceive a design and then take it all the way through to practical completion, especially on a large project like an airport project. You need teams of hundreds. So
True.
when you graduate, think about what you want to do. Do you want to be part of a bigger team? Do you want to be on a smaller team doing a residential or a commercial office fit out? And you'll do that by working for different practices and also learning different softwares. So working on a project like that and being able to utilize your 3D skills to demonstrate design intent was really handy, especially when presenting up to the principal level. What you see in this building is a lot of my student influence with the wrapping of a linear material around a structure. We did choose pre-patinated copper, so it kind of has that neo-Denari wrapping aesthetic. And there are certain moments in the building that I got to, develop based on the design aesthetic I worked on when I was a student. And that was really handy. I mean, to have those computer skills really helped evolve the design, but also as a young graduate, gave me that opportunity to work on a design project. So that was really cool. Another thing was when I was a student, I used to be a skateboarder. I used to skateboard ramps, hence the love of curves. The hardscaping on the outside of the building, I got to design as well. And subconsciously, it was designed for skateboarders. So what you'll find for any viewers from Sheffield out there, you'll see skateboarders skating it in their weekends, and a lot of the steps and the ledges and the rails were actually designed to, of course, allow people to progress into the building, but it also became like a natural playground for skateboarders. So it was kind of cool to see not only a building be designed for the students to utilize for learning, but also locals to utilize it as a partial skateboard park. In 2005, I joined HOK in London. For those who don't know HOK, they're a pretty big practice. I think at the time they were the third largest architecture practice in the world. So it was an interesting time to be joining I had some friends who had spoken highly of HOK because of their building information modeling commitment. So I applied for a job. It wasn't even there. One tip to students graduating looking for work: sometimes even if the company isn't hiring, if you have skills or you have a great portfolio, you can just send them a CV, and if you're good, or if you spark their interest, or if you call up or maybe get some work experience, you might get a job. So I was advised that at a young age, apply for the companies you want to work for, even if there's not a position. Sometimes you'll get lucky. Sometimes you might know somebody there who might put in a good word for you, or at least get you a coffee interview, but you just never know. So if you're passionate about a certain architecture firm's aesthetic and you really admire them, put in an application and give them a call. You just never know. So I did that with HOK, and Patrick McLeany was the CEO at the time. He used to fly in from the US and come do presentations in the London office, and he was heavily committed to investing in BIM. So it was a great opportunity when I got there that every project was using or starting to use BIM in some form or another. So it might have been using AutoCAD Architectural Desktop, which is now AutoCAD Architecture, or we were starting a few projects on Revit. So that was really fascinating. So it was an interesting time to sort of see the commitment of the company, the new technologies being used, and then being rolled out on quite large projects. The other great thing about working for a large practice like that, and I know like some students or graduates might not want to go and work for a larger practice, but you do get exposure, or you do get to work on some really interesting projects. They get to win large projects, and you get to work on large international projects. The coolest thing was, well, one of the coolest projects I got to work on and design was the Baku Flaming Towers project. And this is this incredible towering project with three parts to it, rising up over the water, overlooking it from the hills. So that was really cool to work in the conceptual design, and then others took over the project and started turning it into a BIM package project and delivering it. In 2006, I left HOK to work for building design partnership called BDP. There was a lot of opportunity in the mid 2000s. So when it is boom times, it can be quite easy to jump around and work for some firms that you admire. I really admired some of the projects that BDP had done. They were more of a London-based practice, or sorry, a British-based practice. So they had some great projects, a different design philosophy or procurement route to say HOK or other practices I worked for. So what was apparent when I first joined BDP is they would work with the contractor on day one in a design and build procurement contract. So you would be designing your building with the contractor, and they would be reviewing it with you from a construction point of view, a budget point of view. They would be very vocal about certain curves that we're trying to do on the projects, or certain things we wanted to do based on previous projects they had done with us. So it was interesting. What happens in many other countries where you would design a project, you get planning approval, then you would start to put together some packages and then start to tender it out, and then contractors would submit their price for the tender. This was different. The contractors would almost be running the show.
So I have heard from some architects from India, not from outside, is especially in the meetings with contractors or engineers, it starts to get really heated, the room, because you are very passionate about your design. They want to make it stand. Their main problem is making it stand, making it cost effective and everything. Did those meetings also get very heated?
Yes. Sometimes, yeah, on certain projects, if the architect is trying to push the boundaries, there's always a bit of pushback from the engineers, depending on what you're trying to do, or from the client sometimes if you're blowing the budget. The way to sort of monitor it as well is to hire a good QS, quantity surveyor. So at the early stages, you can advise your client to bring on board a QS, and every time you're designing something, submitting it, the QS can review it and check that it's on budget. I've actually worked on smaller projects or picked up smaller projects where the original architect had done a design, the client loved it, then the QS would price it. It was double the budget, and the client had got rid of that architect, and then I came in to try and reduce the budget by half. And that's when you've got to think about things like structure, of course, because steel beams are really expensive, and also glazing. Glazing can be exceptionally expensive for certain types of glazing. So little things like that, you can still achieve beautiful buildings, but you kind of need to compromise. Historically, you've had Frank Lloyd Wright, who used to fight with his draftees and engineers. I think there was an example.
Yeah.
There was an example when they did the Johnson Wax building, and
Yes.
he shows how strong his columns are, and he loads them up with
Yeah.
bricks, and they double load it, and then it collapses under the double load. So I think it's worth challenging typical engineering assumptions, because sometimes engineers will work to traditional sizes of structural members that have worked on projects before. If you want to go, if you want to go more bespoke or outside the norm, there's a lot more risk associated for the engineers. And if the building fails, then the engineers are going to get blamed, especially if it's a structural failure. So it's a balance. The other trick that I've heard of is when you hear Frank Gehry interview, and he always designs a building with a sacrificial lamb, because he knows that that's going to be targeted. They're going to get rid of it, and then he'll be able to sneak in the other stuff. So there's all these little tricks that architects play to get their designs across the line, whether it's balancing the design with the engineer or designing something so outrageous that they disregard it, and then they can sort of get in the design they really want.
That was it, you guys. I hope you liked that conversation. If you did, let me know in the comments below. And that was it. I will see you guys soon with more content. Bye bye.